Now, the greatest radio shows of all time.
Suspense.
The Shadow Node.
Washington calling David Harding, counter-spy.
Classic radio theater.
The Great Gildersleeve.
Fibber McGee and Molly.
Dragnet. Gunsmoke.
The Lone Ranger.
Now, step back into a time machine with your host, Wyatt Cox.
Good evening, friends of the Inner Sanctum.
We have a lot of people who enjoy Gunsmoke, and I hope those folks enjoyed this episode of Luke-Slaughter-of-Tombstone, a short-run series starring Sam Buffington. This episode was originally broadcast March 30th, 1958.
Slaughter's my name, Luke Slaughter. Cattle's my business. It's a tough business. It's big business. I've got a big stake in it. And there's no man west of the Rio Grande big enough to take it from me.
Luke Slaughter of Tombstone. Luke Slaughter of Tombstone, Civil War cavalryman turned Arizona cattleman. Across the territory from Yuma to Fort Defiance, from Flagstaff to the Huachucas, and below the border through Chihuahua and Sonora, his name was respected or feared, depending on which side of the law you were on. Man of vision, man of legend, Luke Slaughter of Tombstone.
The time finally came when I decided there'd be more profit in raising my own cattle than driving other men's herds up to Tombstone from Mexico and Texas. At about the same time, I heard that Aaron Holcomb spread was for sale. So one day, Wichita and I rode down toward the San Pedro Valley to look it over. Well, Wichita, what do you think?
Well, if you was to ask me...
I am.
You are. I'll be damned. Well, I think it's a pretty good proposition all around. You get a good, healthy herd of beef cattle and several hundred acres of grazing land, and Aaron Holcomb gets out like he wants to. I don't see how either one of you can lose.
That's the way I look at it. Let's ride over to Aaron's and close the deal. Howdy, Aaron.
Howdy, Luke. Wichita.
Howdy, Aaron.
Well, Aaron, I'm ready to talk business.
Good. Come on into the house and I'll see if I can get Sarah to rustle up some coffee.
It's a mighty nice herd you got there, Aaron. How many head you figure you're running?
Well, not counting calves, somewhere between 450 to 475.
Let's count the calves and make it 500.
That's mighty generous of you, Luke. Got company, Sarah?
Well, Mr. Slaughter in Wichita, how are you?
Hello, Mrs. Holcomb.
Howdy, Mom.
Suppose you could find some hot coffee for these gents?
I wouldn't be the least bit surprised.
Sit down, Luke. Over there, Wichita.
Thank you.
Sarah, Mr. Slaughter is interested in buying.
Well, I must say that's a relief. I said to Aaron, Mr. Slaughter, I said, if Mr. Slaughter won't take the place off your hands, who will?
Well, it isn't exactly a matter of taking it off your hands, Mrs. Holcomb. Aaron's built up a valuable spread here.
Yes, but who in Tombstone's in a position to buy it but you? And I declare I'd go out of my mind if we had to wait around here for goodness knows how long, selling it off piece by piece and cow by cow.
Well, I don't think that'll be necessary. Aaron, I'm prepared to offer you $5,000 for your outfit. Lock, stock, and barrel.
5,000?
Well, now, that's a pretty fancy price, if you ask me.
Nobody did, Wichita.
Wichita's right, Luke. It is a fancy price, but I'll accept it.
Good. I've drawn up a bill of sale and a deed, Aaron. If you'll just sign here.
All right, Luke.
How about the money? You want me to deposit it to your account in the bank in town?
No, Luke, I never did trust banks. They get robbed too often. I prefer cash.
I thought you might. So I brought it with me. There you are. 5,000 in $100 bills. Count it.
I don't have to, Luke. I know it's all there.
Well, that's an awful lot of cash to have laying around, Aaron.
Oh, it won't be laying around, Wichita. I got my own private hiding place.
Where?
Well, I don't aim to disclose it to a swindling old coot like you. But I will say it's under a board in this kitchen, but I ain't specifying which board.
You always was a cautious one, Aaron. Reckon that's why you lived so long.
No, Wichita. Sarah is why I've lived so long.
Oh, well, I reckon she is at that.
Say, what are you two talking about?
Hey, you see, Aaron, you've been reformed so long that greenhorns like Luke here don't even know what a bad man you once was.
What?
You mean to tell me, Luke, you never heard of a gunslinger named Big Aaron?
No. I guess that was before my time.
Yeah, I guess it was. Why, Aaron here was once the fastest gun in the Panhandle. How many men was it you helped along to their reward, Aaron? Some say 12, others 14. I never did rightly know.
Wichita, you talk too much.
Yeah, that's what Luke says. But be that as it may, truth is, Luke, Aaron probably could have outgunned you in his prime.
Well, I don't know. That was a long time ago. Before Sarah came along and showed me the error of my ways.
Well, don't get the idea I was exactly a gospel singer, Mr. Slaughter. You don't learn many hymns at the birdcage in Abilene. But I loved him.
So I hung up my gun, and for nearly 20 years I ain't used it on anything bigger than a rattlesnake or a coyote.
You see, I preferred a live husband to a dead legend.
And you live to regret it, hmm?
Not a single day of it. Mr. Slaughter, when will you want us to move off the place?
There's no hurry, Mrs. Holcomb. You just take your time.
Where are you two heading? On west?
Oh, mercy, no. We're going back east to Missouri.
Well, I never. Folks don't go back east. Not when they got themselves a going outfit like you have, or had.
Oh, but I've still got kinfolk back there.
Well, kin ain't no reason to leave God's country.
And I've got a hankering to see green fields again and to grow something else besides beef cattle.
You gonna be a farmer, Aaron?
Looks like it. If that's what Sarah wants, then it's what I want.
Aaron, ain't you carrying this devotion thing a little too far?
All right, come on. Let's head back for Tombstone, Wichita.
Yeah, I know. I talk too much.
Good evening, Mr. Slaughter.
Evening, Nellie. What's on the fire tonight?
Well, there's fried pork chops and fried steak. I'd recommend the pork chops.
We'll see. What's the matter with my cattle?
Oh, I didn't mean that, Mr. Slaughter.
Evening, Luke. Evening, Nellie.
Evening, Wichita.
Pork chops or steak, Wichita?
Don't make no difference. I'm hungrier than a woodpecker with a headache. Steak, I guess.
No, I'll bring it along as soon as I get these other gentlemen's orders.
Where you been?
Oh, I just dropped by the epitaph office to pick up the evening paper. Well, what you know?
What?
Here's your name in the paper, big as life.
What does it say?
We understand Luke Slaughter has decided to settle in these parts. Yesterday, we heard he bought Aaron Holcomb's spread down on the San Pedro River. We also understand Luke paid a very pretty penny for it.
I wonder how that got in the paper.
Why, I don't know, Luke.
I'll bet you don't. You know, between that nosy nose of yours and that wagging tongue, somebody's going to get into trouble someday, and I hope it'll only be you.
Now, Luke, I was only...
My business is my business and nobody else's, and I don't like reading about it in the newspaper. Is that clear?
Why, sure, Luke, sure.
Stop it, please.
Stop what? I was just trying to be friendly.
If you just give me your order.
Say, I got it.
Appears Nellie's having a little trouble.
Who are those two, Wichita? You know them?
Never laid eyes on them before. Strangers, most likely.
Must be. Well, they'd know better.
Come on now, don't be like
What seems to be the difficulty, gentlemen?
Huh? Oh, we ain't having any difficulty. We just being friendly with this little filly here.
It's all right, Nellie. I'll take care of this.
Thank you, Mr. Slaughter.
I guess you boys aren't very well acquainted in Tombstone, or you'd know that this is the dining room of the San Jose house, not the bar room of the Occidental. Rough stuff doesn't go here.
Who are you? The owner of the hotel?
No.
Maybe a sky pilot, then.
No.
Then what right you got butting in?
The right any man's got to help a lady when she needs it. Now, you boys better mind your manners or go get your supper someplace else.
You know, mister, I just may have to cut you down to size.
I wouldn't try it, son, if I was you.
Why not, Pop?
Guess you don't know who you're talking to.
That's right. I don't know and I don't care.
Well, you better care. This here is Luke Slaughter. And what's more...
Luke Slaughter? Well, you're quite a famous man, Mr. Slaughter. Say, this is the fellow we was reading about in tonight's paper, Thad.
Yeah, well, buying up ranches is one thing and pushing people around's another.
I'm not pushing anybody around. I'm just telling you to mind your manners. Come on, Wichita. Let's tie on the feed bag. I guess I must have discouraged the two Randy Ranahans, because a couple of minutes later they left, presumably to find a dining room where it was permitted to pinch the waitresses. And I forgot all about them, since my business is primarily not the protection of Tombstone's womenfolk, but cattle. I was tending to my business the next afternoon when Wichita busted into my office at the Cattlemen's Association.
A terrible thing has happened, an awful thing.
What, Wichita?
It's Sarah Holcomb.
What's the matter with her?
Well, Aaron just brought her into the doctor. She's cut up something terrible.
Who cut her?
Aaron don't know, and she can't talk. She's unconscious.
We'd better go over to the docks and see if there's anything we can do. Got to the doctor's office on Tough Nut Street. We found Sarah lying on a big bed in the back room. Aaron's huge body seemed shrunken as he knelt by the bed, holding her tiny hand in his. The doctor waved us back into his office and closed the door behind him.
How is she, Doc?
She's dying, Wichita.
What happened to her?
Luke, I've been doctoring out here for a long time, and I've seen people die in a lot of different ways. I've treated bullet wounds, dug out arrows, sewed up knife gashes. But I've never seen anything as rotten as what somebody did to that poor woman.
What did they do to her?
Spurs. Big rowel chihuahuas. They must have kicked her for a long time. She's got holes all over her body.
You dirty sidewinder.
Is she conscious?
She won't be for long.
Can I talk to her?
Well, I guess it don't make any difference now. Go on in.
No, sir. Sir. How do you feel, Mrs. Holcomb?
Oh, not too good, Mr. Slaughter. But I'll be all right in a few days. Doctor said so.
Of course you will. Mrs. Holcomb, who did this to you?
I don't know. I never saw them before. There were two of them. They rode up to the ranch just before noon.
I was down in the wash looking after a new drop calf, Luke.
I see. Go on, Mrs. Holcomb.
Oh, they said to give them the money you paid us for the ranch. I told them I didn't know what they was talking about. And then one of them knocked me down, and the other began kicking me with his spurs.
Sure, no. Sure. Can you tell me what they looked like, Mrs. Holcomb? Anything about them?
Well, there was two of them. I think I heard one of them call the other Thad.
Thad?
Yeah. He was the little one. He's evil. He's cruel and mean and evil. It was him that did this to me. Oh.
Sure. All right, sure. Mrs. Holcomb. You just lie back and rest now.
She tell you anything, Luke?
Word she knew she did, Wichita. One of them's named Thad. Does that mean anything to you?
No, can't say that it does.
Those two cowboys in the San Jose house last night. Didn't one of them answer to the name of Thad? The little one.
Wait, by Tophet, I think he did.
Wasn't he wearing Chihuahua spurs with long rowels?
Yeah, he was.
Doctor, come quick!
March 30th, 1958, Luke Slaughter of Tombstone on Classic Radio Theater with Wyatt Cox. Luke Slaughter of Tombstone only ran 16 episodes. William N. Robeson compiled a pretty good show here. The only problem was it was a Sunday afternoon show, a Sunday early evening show, I should say, and it passed away before Have Gun Will Travel took its time slot. From March 30th, 1958, the 6th episode of Luke Slaughter of Tombstone on Classic Radio Theater with Wyatt Cox.
The huge figure of Aaron Holcomb filled the doorway, behind which lay his dead wife. His broad features sagged with shock and grief, and tightened in determination. He pulled out his gun, a gun which had not been drawn against a man in nearly 20 years. Slowly he spun the chamber, making sure that it was fully loaded. What are you aiming to do, Aaron?
What do you think I aim to do?
This is a job for the law, Aaron. The sheriff will have those men by nightfall.
They'll both be dead by nightfall.
If you kill them, you'll hang. Let the law handle this and they'll hang.
Maybe. Or maybe they'll go to Yuma for life. I can't take that chance.
They'll get a fair trial.
Did they give Sarah a fair trial? Bushwhacking a defenseless woman? They got no more guts than their father had.
Their father?
Yeah. You heard Sarah say one of them's named Thad.
Yeah.
I know who they are now. Thad Jenks boys.
Who's Thad Jenks?
Last man I outdrew back in Abilene nearly 20 years ago. A yellow coward who went for his gun when my back was turned. But he never got it out of the holster.
Yeah, that's right, Luke. I was there.
Quiet, Wichita.
You see, Luke, they weren't after the money. At least that isn't the reason they came up here to Tombstone. They came a-feuding. Well, they got a feud now, all right, a blood feud.
But, Aaron, you can't take the law into your own hands.
I aim to.
Then I gotta remind you, Aaron. I'm a deputy sheriff, and it's my duty to stop you.
I wouldn't try it, Luke.
Aaron, listen to me. What would Sarah think if you put the gun back on?
Sarah can't think no more, Luke. Now, if you gents don't mind, I'd like to be alone with her for a little while.
Wichita.
Yeah, Luke?
Go over to the sheriff's office. Tell him he's going to have a shooting on his hands if he doesn't lock those two up before Aaron finds him.
How you know they're still in town?
I don't, but I'm sure going to find out if I have to search every saloon on Allen Street. Let's go. And that's just about what I did. They weren't in Hereford's or Bob Hatch's. They weren't in the Oriental or the Occidental. I just about decided they'd been smart enough to skip town when I found them in the Alhambra.
Hey there, bartender. Let's have another bottle here. This one's empty.
Sure, can't you see we're dying of thirst here?
Never mind, bartender. They've had their last drink for a while.
Well, if it isn't Mr. Luke Slaughter. What's the idea of the gun, Mr. Slaughter?
It's Deputy Sheriff Slaughter.
Signifying?
I'm arresting you two for the murder of Sarah Holcomb.
You must be mistaken, Slaughter. We don't know no one named Sarah Holcomb.
Those spurs you're wearing look mighty sharp.
Well, they are. My horse has an awful tough hide.
It's too bad Sarah Holcomb didn't have a tough hide when you used him on her. Now move.
Nobody's moving. Unless he wants to be stopped with a bullet.
Aaron, listen to me.
Put your gun away, Luke. It's too late to play lawman.
Aaron, I can't let...
Just step to one side out of the line of fire. These boys and me are going to talk business.
If you try it, I gotta defend him, Aaron.
It don't matter much to me, Luke. If I have to kill you to get him, well, then I'll have to.
Hey, who is this crazy old fool?
We never saw him before.
That's right, Sonny. But I bet you heard about me all your life. I'm the fella who killed your pappy. But I killed him in a fair gunfight, just like I'm going to kill you. Not the sneaking, snaky way you killed my wife.
He's out of his mind, Slaughter. I tell you, we didn't kill his wife.
He's convinced that you did, and so am I.
I'm putting my pistol back in its holster, so everything will be fair and square. Now, you boys can take off your guns and try me, or you can go for them and try me. Don't make any difference. Either way, I'm going to kill you, and either way, it'll be a quicker and easier death than you gave Sarah.
Oh, look, mister, you're making a mistake.
Leave us out of here. We'll get out of town and never come back.
You're never leaving this town. You're staying right here, on Boot Hill. Now draw.
Aaron, you go for your gun and I'll have to go for mine.
You do that, Luke. But I won't be aiming at you.
I couldn't draw on Aaron, and he knew it. He knew there was nothing I could do to stop his vengeance.
March 30th, 1958, Luke Slaughter of Tombstone on Classic Radio Theater with Wyatt Cox. The conclusion follows these important messages from your favorite radio station. Classic Radio Theater family, you know our friend Mike Lindell has a passion to help everyone get the best sleep of your life. He didn't stop by just creating the best pillow. He created the best bed sheets ever. They look and feel great, which means an even better night's sleep for me because, you know, I'm working like 67 hours a day. Now, Mike's offering the best deal on his Giza Dreams bed sheets ever. You can get a set of Giza sheets for as low as $29.98. You'll never want to sleep on anything else once you slept on a set of Giza Dream sheets. A special offer for you right now. You can get a set of Giza sheets for as low as $29.98. Call 1-800-928-4715. Use the promo code Wyatt. Or go to mypillow.com, use the promo code Wyatt. It's good on anything on the website. That number again, 1-800-928-4715. Use my promo code Wyatt. Thanks for tuning in to Classic Radio Theater with Wyatt Cox here on your favorite radio station. Now the conclusion of Luke Slaughter of Tombstone and the Aaron Holcomb Story, March 30th, 1958.
Silence of waiting death hovered over the room. Smell of fear was there, too. Aaron stood facing the two terrified brothers, his feet wide apart, his open hand hovering an inch away from his holstered gun. For seconds that seemed like hours, they stood there. And finally, Harv Jenks went for his gun. Aaron's arm was a blur as he pumped his shots into Harv before he could get his gun out. As he fell dying, he fired once, and across Aaron's chest, a red stain slowly spread. Thad Jenks stood in frozen terror, his gun still holstered. Then he found his voice.
Mr. Slaughter, for the love of God, don't let him kill me!
All right, Aaron. That's enough shooting.
You're right, Luke. A bullet's too good for this one with those nice, sharp spurs. Of course, I ain't wearing spurs, sonny. And I got no knife to cut you up like you did Sarah. But I got two hands. Big hands. Hands big enough to crack your bones. Big enough to choke the life out of you little by little.
Arms swinging, his great hands outstretched like a huge gorilla, Aaron slowly moved across the room toward the terrified killer. Thad Jenks backed away from him until he bumped into the bar. He seemed to remember his gun. Yanking it out, he poured shot after shot at Aaron, but he never stopped advancing. The gun was empty. Thad threw it away and tried to make a break for the door, but Aaron, grabbing him by the throat with one hand and smashing him in the face with the other. That's enough, Aaron. Let him go. Let him go, Aaron. He's dead.
Dead? You sure?
Yes, Aaron. You've had your revenge.
I'm sorry, Luke. I had to do it.
I know. I'll go get the doc, Aaron.
No, Luke. There's nothing the doc can do for a man that's stopped 6 slugs. Luke?
Yes, Aaron.
Luke,
This is the only time I ever broke a promise to Sarah.
I know.
But there's one last promise I don't want to break. If you'll help me.
Sure I will, Aaron.
I promised Sarah we'd go back to Missouri together for the rest of our days. Luke, will you see to it that we do?
Luke-Slaughter of Tombstone, starring Sam Buffington, was written by Thomas Houghton and adapted for radio and directed by William N. Robeson. Editorial supervision by Tom Hanley. Supporting Mr. Buffington were Irene Tedrow, Dee Tatum, Sam Edwards, Chet Stratton, Dick LeGrand, Junius Matthews, and Lou Merrill. With music composed by Wilbur Hatch and conducted by Amerigo Marino. Next week at this time, we return with...
Slaughter's the name. Luke Slaughter. When we meet up again, you can call me that. Luke Slaughter.
A tragic end to Sam Buffington's life. He was a wonderful performer. Luke-Slaughter of Tombstone, March 30th, 1958, on Classic Radio Theater with Wyatt Cox. I have a friend and fellow Kansan by the name of Mike, who now lives in Macomb, Illinois, from Andover, Kansas. And he listens to us and says he has a crush on Claudia. So I'll bring you some Claudia. Unfortunately, she's a happily married woman, you know. But here's an episode of Claudia, March 30th, 1948.
Your Coca-Cola bottler presents Claudia, based on the play and novels by Rose Franken. Brought to you transcribed Monday through Friday by your friendly neighbor who bottles Coca-Cola. Relax, and while you're listening, refresh yourself. Have a Coke. And now, Claudia.
Well, David, I'm glad there's one cheerful man in this office, at any rate.
What's wrong, Roger? I thought you liked the idea of going to Chicago.
I like the idea of going to Chicago and meeting Carrington and of getting our freight terminal underway, but I do not like the idea of leaving New York.
Well, I guess we can't have everything.
I know. One of the most dismal facts of human existence is the difficulty of being in two places at the same time.
Well, you won't have to be in Chicago very long, I hope.
Makes no difference. The trouble is that I must be there at all. David, I'm going to ask you and Claudia to do me a favor.
Oh, we'd feel honored, Roger. Do you want us to entertain a maiden aunt or get your laundry back?
Well, perhaps it's a combination of both. I'd like you to keep an eye on my son, Jeffrey, while I'm away.
Glad to.
Oh, don't be hasty, David. He may be more of a handful than you imagine.
Oh, I doubt it.
I really don't know. He's away at boarding school, you know, and he's at that age of rapid changes. I see him perhaps once in 3 months, and his behavior on one occasion is no clue to what he'll be like 3 months later.
Seems to me I remember what that's like.
A year ago, he seemed to be planning a career in professional football. He was 15 then. Last fall, he was determined to become an art critic. Around Christmas, I had an actor for a son. And now, David, well, in a few hours, you will know more about Jeffrey than I do.
When's he coming to New York?
Well, he'll be leaving Boston around noon. He spent most of his vacation up there with his grandmother.
And he should be here about 5, huh?
Exactly. Can't stay at a hotel. His mother, of course, is away campaigning for something or other very worthy. And now that I have to go to Chicago, you are really the only people I can turn to.
Oh, we'd be delighted, Roger. We have an extra room, and we'd love to have him stay.
It's very good of you, David.
Jeffrey's 16 now, isn't he?
He was 16 about 2 months ago.
That's wonderful. Claudia's only 19, so they'll get along famously. Well, after all, he's only 3 years younger than she is.
You'd be surprised how long 3 years can be.
I'm looking forward to learning. We'll expect Jeffrey for dinner tonight, then, Roger.
That's very good of you. Let me see now. It's 10:15. I have half an hour to get to the station for my train. I'll send Jeffrey a telegram. He'll get it before he leaves for his station. And he should be at your apartment at 6 o'clock.
David, it's 6 o'clock. Jeffrey should be here any minute.
He should be if he can find the place.
Why shouldn't he find it?
Oh, maybe he doesn't want to spend the night with a couple of old fogies.
David, you are not an old fogey. In fact, you're not even a young fogey.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
You overwhelm me with your flattery.
I've never heard of a young fogey. Have you?
How could there be young fogies? There wouldn't be anything left for them to become when they get old.
Do you think we're ever going to become old? I can't imagine.
I'm old already. Old and foolish. I can't even learn any new trick.
I mean really old, with gray hair and rheumatism.
Got rheumatism already. Hand me my pipe, old lady.
Just a minute.
I steered my rocking chair, puffing away and watching the world go by and thinking to myself about the days when I was young.
Here's your pipe, Granddad. Do you think you can manage to light the match yourself?
Well, Daddy, I could have one last wild fling and try to light my own pipe myself, huh?
David, listen, what do you think Jeffrey's going to want to do for entertainment?
Maybe play with the dog.
He's 16, you said, not 6.
Now, what can you do to entertain a boy 16? Roger didn't seem to know.
Well, the first thing you've got to do is to stop thinking of him as a boy. You aren't much more than 16 yourself.
Madam, I'll never see 25 again.
And I was 16 only 3 years ago.
That's what I said to Roger. But he said those were a very big 3 years.
Oh, men, really. No wonder there's so much juvenile delinquency. And now listen, David, we've got to think of what Jeffrey would do if he were trying to do what he wanted to do. See?
Sure, I see. I see you don't know any more about 16-year-old boys than I do.
David, I was just 16 a little while ago. Wouldn't you have married me if I was still 16?
Stop this right now. You're only going to make me regret the years I wasted. I'm sorry I didn't marry you when you were 2. You haven't really changed much since then.
Darling, we haven't got time for this. I'm sure we've just got to treat him like everybody else.
Maybe you're right. We'll just take him to dinner, and then we'll go to that movie around the corner that we've been waiting for weeks, and we'll have a nice, long talk about world affairs.
Fine.
Huh? You better make up your mind what you think about world affairs, because there is Jeffrey.
I'll go. Remember, we're going to treat him like an equal.
I just hope he treats us like one.
Hello. You must be Jeffrey Killian. I'm Claudia Naughton, David's wife.
How do you do?
Please come in. Did you have a nice trip down from Boston?
It was very pleasant, thank you.
David, I'd like you to meet Jeffrey Killian.
Hello, Jeffrey. Welcome to New York. Glad you got here.
How do you do, Mr. Naughton?
Let's have your bag. I'll show you to your room.
Oh, no, sir. Please let me carry it. It's rather heavy.
Heavy? Well, I think I can manage. Don't you think so, Claudia?
Of course. Excuse me, sir, but I think I'd better.
Well, if you insist, Jeffrey.
Yes, sir. You see, it's rather heavy, sir.
I see. By now.
Well, you don't want to go to your room right away, do you, Jeffrey? Let's sit around and talk a while. You look very much like your father, and he's one of the nicest people in the world.
Yes, Mrs. Naughton. Thank you.
Wouldn't you like to sit down, Jeffrey? I don't suppose you smoke yet.
Oh, no, sir. We're not allowed to smoke until we're 18, sir.
I see. Look, Jeffrey, I don't see why we can't all call each other by our first names. Mine's David.
Yes, sir.
You must go to a very good school, don't you?
Yes, Mrs. Naughton. It's the best school in the country.
That's fine. But it must be nice to get away on a vacation now and then. I know your father was very sorry he had to go to Chicago today and couldn't be here. But we were very glad for the chance to meet you.
I'm very glad to meet you, too, Mrs. Naughton. I like to be with older people once in a while.
Older people? You mustn't think of us as older people, Jeffrey. You must just think of us as friends of yours.
Oh, I see, Mrs. Naughton.
Don't you think you could manage to call us, Oh, well, never mind.
Yes, sir.
What do you usually do when you're on a vacation, Jeffrey?
The usual thing, Mrs. Naughton.
What's the usual thing?
Dances, sir. Parties, a theater or two.
Oh, that must be lots of fun.
I'm afraid you'd find it a bit juvenile, Mrs. Naughton. I do myself.
Then you mean you don't go? Huh?
Oh, yes, sir, I go. I just mean sometimes it's a waste of time. I like to explain that when I talk to older people. Sometimes they seem to get the wrong impression of us, sir.
Jeffrey, you must really go to a very good school.
Oh, yes, it's only during vacations that we have all these parties, Mrs. Naughton.
I'm glad you reminded me of that, Jeffrey. It's so long ago for me that I'd forgotten what it's like. I think maybe Claudia, I mean Mrs. Norton, remembers. Do you, darling?
I do remember going to dances. Sort of.
One of the things you'll learn, Jeffrey, as you grow older is that ladies have the longest memories.
I've noticed that already, sir.
Why, of all the...
Claudia, do you remember vacations from school?
Do you remember your 40th birthday?
You wouldn't think to look at me that I was over 40, would you, Jeffrey?
Oh, no, sir. You look very young for 40.
Well, thank you, Jeffrey. Now, what would you like to do this evening? We were thinking of going to a movie. Thought you might like to come along.
Oh, I'm afraid I can't, Mr. Norton. Didn't Dad tell you, sir?
Well, your father didn't tell me anything. I mean, anything that was much help.
Oh, I'm sorry, but I'm going to a party tonight.
A party? How exciting.
It isn't really, Mrs. Norton. Perhaps you remember what they're like. Always the same people. Very young. Usually jitterbugging. Although I'm happy to say that's on the way out.
It is?
Oh, yes. During the war, that was very popular, Mrs. Norton. But since then, things have changed a great deal. We've all grown a lot older.
We've all grown a lot older since this morning, Jeffrey. A great deal older. Don't you think so, Mrs. Norton?
Much older. David, I think I'm going to need help getting out of this chair.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Something the matter?
My wife, Jeffrey, suffers from rheumatism.
I'm indeed upset to hear that, sir. My father has stomach trouble. I guess when people get to
You don't need to finish that sentence, Jeffrey. You're perfectly right. Terrible things happen to people when they grow older. The worst part of it is that they happen when you least expect it. Did you expect all this to happen to you today, Claudia?
I know just how it is, Mr. Norton. When I was younger, I used to be able to do all sorts of things I can't do anymore.
What sort of things, Jeffrey?
Well, up at school, there's a very famous little store called the Jigger Shop.
What's a jigger?
Well, nobody really knows. The shop is so old, they've forgotten. But the younger boys like to go in and eat the fanciest things you ever saw, Mrs. Norton.
You mean banana splits and things like that?
Oh, yes. I myself used to be able to eat 2 at a time. Sometimes even 3.
Now I suppose you can't even force more than one. Well, Jeffrey, that's the way life is. You might as well view it philosophically.
That's true. I can't eat more than one now. And as a matter of fact, sir, I've really lost my taste for them.
You don't say.
Except on special occasions like when we beat St. Mark's at football.
It's funny, I love banana splits.
You are an anachronism, darling.
I am?
I've heard that when people get much older, they begin to like the things they liked in the first place all over again.
Jeffrey, I think you have put your finger on a very important consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Norton. I really enjoyed this conversation very much, but I'm afraid I have to start getting dressed for the party.
Oh, it's for dinner, Jeffrey.
Yes, and please don't wait up for me. I'll be very, very late.
Perfectly all right. We'll leave the door on the latch.
It's certainly been nice talking to you like this. It's really a relief from talking to people of one's own age all the time.
Jeffrey, before you go, maybe you'd like to guess just how old Mrs. Norton is.
Well, sir, she looks very much like my uncle's wife.
And how old is she?
Well, she's quite old, sir. She's at least 20.
Thank you very much, Jeffrey. You've relieved me considerably.
Well, thank you, sir, but I've got to get dressed, sir.
It's the door down the hall to the right.
Thank you.
Well, I did my best to treat him as an equal, but I really think he's too old and wise for me. How do you feel?
David, I feel just like an old fogey.
Well, don't worry, darling. I think it'll turn out just as Jeffrey predicts, and your second childhood will set in again as soon as the young man goes back to Boston.
If the lady of the house sometimes shows less enthusiasm for unexpected guests than her husband does, that's because it's her job to serve the refreshments, and occasionally it's a job that stumps her. But if she checks regularly to be sure there's plenty of Coke on ice, she can stay bright and carefree, no matter how much company knocks at her door. Keeping a good supply of Coca-Cola on hand is really a kind of hospitality insurance, it seems.
Excuse me, Mr. King, sir.
Oh, yes. Yes, certainly, Jeffrey. Glad to see you. You enjoying your vacation?
I certainly am, sir. And I hope I won't awaken Mr. and Mrs. Norton when I get home from the party this evening. Do they retire very early, sir?
Oh, not always, Jeffrey. In fact, I hear tomorrow night after you've gone, Claudia and David are going out to paint the town red. Maybe you've given them an idea or two.
Mr. and Mrs. Norton are going to a nightclub, did you say, sir?
Well, that's what I understand, Jeffrey. I hope you won't disapprove of what happens.
I'll try not, Mr. King, but I think, sir, I'd better hear what happens. I should hate to have been a bad influence.
Well, Jeffrey, I don't think you have, but we'll see. And as I was about to say, every day, Monday through Friday, Claudia comes to you transcribed with the best wishes of your friendly neighbor who bottles Coca-Cola. So listen again tomorrow at the same time. And now this is Joe King saying au revoir. And remember, whoever you are, whatever you do, wherever you may be, when you think of refreshment, think of Coca-Cola. For ice-cold Coca-Cola makes any pause the pause that refreshes. Claudia has come to you, most of you at any rate, for the past 6 months now. We'd welcome any suggestions or anything you may wish to say about the show. Just write to Claudia, Post Office Box number 173, Church Street Station, New York 8, New York. And I'll repeat that address. To Claudia, Post Office Box number 173, Church Street Station, New York 8, New York. And now here's a word from your friendly neighbor who bottles Coca-Cola.
For the days when Coca-Cola was bottled in your hometown. I know some of you don't believe that ever happened, but it did. I grew up and my family and the Cub Scout troop and all would go down and watch the Coca-Cola being bottled in the local bottling plant. All in glass bottles, too. March 30th, 1948, Claudia here on Classic Radio Theater with Wyatt Cox. Visit our webpage, classicradio.stream, where you can stream our shows on demand. Learn about building a classic radio collection of your own. You can contact me, find our social media links, and if you're so inclined, you can buy me a copy. The Buy Me a Coffee money certainly helps us maintain our distribution channels and helps us acquire additional classic radio collections to bring you here on your favorite station. Please thank this radio station, support their advertisers. It's their kindness and courtesy that we're here each and every time we roll around. And tell all your friends the greatest radio shows of all time are right here at this spot on the dial. Classic Radio Theater with Wyatt Cox on your favorite radio station.